So, you know what, I was looking through some thumbnails of recent podcasts to work out what shirts that I wore recently as I picked a shirt this morning to iron to bring it into work. I don't know why. I should imagine no one's watching this anyway. Most people listen to what we do, if anything. But I thought, no, I'm going to mix it up, make sure I have a different shirt. And then while I was doing my shirt, guess what else I ironed? You'll never guess.
What was this?
It was a 1970s style ABBA outfit.
Excellent.
I told you wouldn't guess. Fancy Dress Party looms this weekend, and I've been nominated to be one of the 4 members of ABBA. Thankfully, one of the male ones. Could have gone either way.
Yeah, that would have been interesting, that, yeah.
Well, given that I've got to wear a wig anyway,
well, I think we want photos next week.
How much will they change hands for, I wonder?
Next week. Was this inspired by your recent trip to the ABBA show in London?
The ABBA voyage. It wasn't, but it was close in timing. It was decided just before by the powers that be. And then we happened to go to ABBA voyage. That was my training.
I was going to say, it was a research, was it? So,
yeah. Well, if I could turn up as an avatar, I'd be fine with that.
Yeah.
Turning up in person and having to sing an ABBA number.
Oh, you got to perform as well.
Well, everybody's going as a pop star across the eras.
Oh, okay.
And whatever you turn up as, you've got to sing a number of that character.
This is a multi-dimensional fancy dress party.
Oh my goodness. And there's some really, really talented people going.
So what song are you going to sing?
I have no idea. I'll be told on the night.
You'll be told on the night. Wow.
Yeah. Dancing Queen or Waterloo or something.
Oh, good. I'm not a big ABBA fan, if I'm honest.
ABBA fan.
ABBA fan, but well,
that's it.
I think I know a few people who might be going to this party, so I shall be sending them messages.
And there may be the odd leak of photo if the paps
we want video, the paps, yeah.
We shall see. Right, I think enough of this jollity. Let's talk about something serious. Hello and welcome to this week's SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. As you know, we try and come up with a different subject every week that might be interesting to business owners and senior managers who are trying to grow their businesses. And this week is no exception. So I'm Dave Parry, and with me to chew over the fine details of something interesting is Richard Buckle.
Hello.
Whatever something interesting is.
Chewing over
I was going to chew the cud and then chew the fat. I didn't know what we were chewing.
This is about yesterday. I was mangling metaphors at a rate of knots, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. What was that one?
It was going down a rabbit hole
or something.
Down a rabbit hole, dog with a bone or something.
We were all over the place.
Everywhere.
So we've subtly changed, I think, what we're going to talk about today, but only subtly. I've been fascinated recently about some work we've been doing on discovery calls and helping clients' sales teams to standardize a broad approach, not to be too strict about it, but to come up with some best practice ideas around what a discovery call contains. And then we've been building HubSpot in the background to support that process and report on it and blah, 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 blah. So we've been doing a bit of that, but then Verity came up with some interesting research that we were looking at, and we were both quite impressed by that. It relates to other stuff we've done before.
Threw us a curveball, isn't it?
Yeah.
To bring in another metaphor.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep a tally on my sheet here. How many metaphors are we going to get? Yeah.
No, it's very interesting. And yeah, likewise, I've been doing a bit of work recently around sales process and qualification. What does qualify a lead or a prospect? And there's a lot more to it. And I think this research that Verity's come up with is starting to put some numbers to some theory. And
great.
It's very interesting to sort of dig into a little bit.
Well, we'll explain in a minute where it's come from and why it's so convincing. But it does relate to some of the machine learning work that we did last year before. Do you want to give a quick summary of that? Just because we did do, I think, a podcast on this some time ago, but just as a revision.
Yeah, I can't remember. We'll have to dig out what the number episode was. But yeah, we started looking at how do we take all of the data points that we've got in HubSpot and actually derive some learning from it to say what are the indicators or behaviors that might influence the deal outcome, so won or lost. And so we had Yevgeny, who's put his talents to use in terms of making us a piece of software that would plug into the back end of HubSpot and suck all the data out and then analyze the data to say, okay, these factors influence whether or not, I don't know, you're probably better with the stats on this,
Well, it's a big machine learning algorithm, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah.
And if the outcome is just did we win or lose the deal, what impacts that you can use to predict it?
Predict it, yeah.
And it was a really interesting piece of the approach to it, how he wrote the software. And we got our heads really into the maths behind it all, which is quite interesting. But the biggest learning at that point is, we didn't have enough data, but not just that, we didn't have the right data.
Right data, yeah.
Because what you realize most software does is it gives you a good impression of where you are now. But unless you really dig into it, and it's hard to get to, it doesn't give a very easy trail of data of where it's been before. So you can't. So you end up having lots of data when a deal is closed, but you don't know what it was looking like when it was only a month old by the time it's closed. So you've got to build in a facility to gather data as you go along. Otherwise, you can't wind the clock back. So that's when Verity came across this other bit of research which someone else has done, which very much aligns to what we were doing. So we thought, well, they've got a lot more data than us. They've got hundreds of thousands of users, and they've done sort of a big data piece of analysis. So we thought we'd spend today summarising a bit of that.
Mulling it over. I can't remember what was it.
And there's actually a couple of different ones out there. But anyway, just to name check then the company that's done it, they're called Gong, G-O-N-G, gong.io. And they are what they call a sales intelligence platform, or I think they use that as their description. And they sit on top of software like HubSpot and Salesforce. So it's not instead of, it's as well as. And it's analytical software designed to help salespeople by analyzing what they're doing. Now, it's a bit scary in a way, because to do that, they actually analyze the content of all the calls and emails that have been going to and fro. So there's a whole privacy issue that you could discuss around that. But hey, if we're learning from the findings, that's not our problem, right? That was whoever took part in the studies and terms and conditions you signed up at the time. But having done that over God knows how many thousands of records, they've come up with some quite interesting insights based purely on the stats. They're not actually saying it's causal in all cases, but they are saying there's a correlation between this thing and the outcome being positive or negative. So that's quite interesting. So why don't we, they've listed 30. Now, we've only got 25 minutes left of the podcast, so we're not going to get through 30 without really rattling through them. But I think there were a few in there that caused us to raise our eyebrows and smile and, to see correlations with stuff that we've done before. So why don't we sort of go through a few of those and pick out the best ones. And the first few relate to not even getting into the discovery call yet, which is what we were going to talk about. They're more the cold call, first contact stage.
Or the email outreach type of prospecting.
Yeah.
So stat number 1, don't use ROI in cold emails.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that, isn't it? Now, even they're only hypothesizing as to why that may be the case. But one of their theories was that if you give a good number, it comes across as being too good to be true, or that you've handpicked the data and it won't relate to them, or whatever.
It's probably worth pointing out that a lot of this data they've got is from A/B testing as well, isn't it? So they've A/B tested this with a ROI and an email without an ROI CTA in it, and they've compared the response rates.
And unlike A/B testing, where you design the experiment that way, they've just analysed a load of recordings and emails as they were sent by different salespeople from different companies. So they found a 15% drop off between those emails in their outreach that quoted ROI compared to those that didn't. Might be coincidental, but it's interesting. Over a big number, it's quite a significant
And I think some
margin.
of this, when you actually look through it, you think it does make sense. It does make sense when you step back from it. But oftentimes I think you're so involved and you think, well, that's great, you want to show that you're going to get your money back and more.
Well, and I think that's probably a common problem with sales guys generally. They're so enthusiastic and they're so passionate about their product, they can't hold back but to talk about all the great things about it. And your interlocutor, the person you're speaking to, isn't there in the same place as you. You've got to give them time to get as excited as you are. And the other one that surprised me about the email bit, and we're probably as guilty of this sometimes, is don't suggest meeting times in that first email. Don't say, book a time with me here and produce your calendar link, which we all do because HubSpot make it so easy to do it. And that puts people off as well on the grounds that you're rushing a bit too fast. Hey, we're not even at first date yet. And
a bit presumptuous.
Yeah, a bit presumptuous. Just ask the, are you interested stuff first? And then if that's positive, then go for the date. So once again, they found quite a difference in the stats.
And I suppose that maybe not counterintuitive is the wrong word, but the whole point of having the kind of book a meeting online at your convenience, that almost feels as though you're offering them offering your prospect or whoever you're writing to an easy solution, isn't it? You're not forcing a date on them. You're saying, look, if you want to book a meeting, here's a button, just click it at your convenience and do all this. But it's interesting that the data says don't do that too soon.
Or at least there's better ways of doing it.
Yeah.
I think what they said is for those emails with a call to action in them, it's okay to have a call to action that improves outcomes. You may be 15% higher than those without CTAs, they say. But if it's more about just expressing your interest rather than booking a meeting, then it doubles that benefit to 30%. So nice. I think I'd learn from that.
Yep. Well, time is a precious commodity, isn't it? And so I think one of the things that they're booking a meeting is you're asking for someone's time, whereas interest, which is a finite resource, whereas interest is
you're just indicating I might be, you might not be. Let's see how this conversation goes. Now the next one I'm guilty of. I don't know why. When I pick up, this is more phone than email, but if I pick up the phone to somebody and they pick up when I've called them, I almost always start with, is this a good time? Thinking I'm being polite. But their research says don't do that.
Data says no. You've got to launch in apparently with a, how have you been?
Yeah. So it's 40% less likely to have a good outcome on the grounds that a lot of people use that as a hook to say, no, it's not a good time.
Yeah.
And then you're stuck then. What do you say? Didn't expect that. Or you're hoping not to get that answer. So don't invite it. Don't give space for it.
Well, I remember reading some stuff on the power of persuasion or science of persuasion. And they were saying that for charity giving, if you say to people, could we have an hour of your time to help X charity? Most people will say no. Yeah. But then you follow that up with okay, well, could you just give £10 then? And you feel as though, okay, that's easy. It's easier to give the money than it is to give the time. Yeah. You've got that one out of the way. You should give time to charities. Just point that out.
Yeah, you should. Well, we should do a whole podcast on charities.
So how have you been?
Well, this comes under the general heading, this next one, of rapport building. And I think it's something that, once again, you see this in less experienced salespeople. They're so hungry to get into the meat and drink of a call, whether this be the cold call or the discovery call, that they can't help just blurting stuff out that they've rehearsed. But actually the best first thing to ask is something about the other person. Start to build that rapport. And this research that Gong have put out said just 6.6 times more likely to have a successful outcome if you start your call with just, how have you been? That's quite astonishing, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, 6.6 times, that's hard to believe that.
Well, I think they're saying that's it's one of like a psychological break, because it almost implies that you've had a previous conversation with somebody when you're asking how they've been. It feels like it breaks the normal pattern of behavior. So the normal pattern is, have you got time? No, hang up the phone. Yeah. Whereas when you say to somebody, how have you been? Yeah. They're what Matt's thinking, when was the last time I spoke to you? How do you? It's like when you get these emails that start with title, like, nice try.
Yeah, there's not a reply at all. No,
but apparently it creates a psychological kind of break in your patterns.
Well, you probably don't feel too inclined to not answer it either. If someone asks you how you've been, the one thing we're all most interested about is ourselves. So, yeah, I'm fine, thanks.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. You might feel a bit suspicious, perhaps, and give a guarded answer. You don't want to give them your full medical history at that point, but yeah, fine. Thanks for asking. And the other one, which to do at the beginning of especially cold calls, is to explain why you're calling. And that's something I think a lot of people miss. Say, now I've got you. Just wonder, we all get millions of cold calls all day. You pick up the phone, you say your name, then they say, can I speak to the same name that you just said? You say, yes, speaking. They're just obviously reading a script, They never say, how are you? Well, the better ones do, but very rarely they do. I was just ringing you up to see if you want to change your electricity contract or your mobile phones, or do you need any more printers, or whatever it is they're trying to flog you. And there's none of this rapport building at the beginning, and they definitely don't say why I've called you. They don't say, I found you online, or I was recommended to call you by a friend, or I saw you on LinkedIn talking about XYZ, just anything as a hook. At least you're thinking, well, I'm not just part of a long list of
I suppose that's if you do a lot of cold calling and you're just reading off a script, then you're just playing a numbers game, aren't you? Yeah. You're just going to find, 1 in 100 people are going to be in the market for whatever you're trying to push. But I think if you're more sophisticated sales approach is to use the data that you've got, how could you use the data that you've got in HubSpot or other CRM platform of choice, and actually use that to pick up on something and build a bit of rapport and bit of
For the
banter.
extra effort, imagine you could double your chances of success. You didn't have to call half the number of people, right?
Yeah.
So if it takes a bit of time to do a little bit of research on each one, I guess people have worked this out, and it's easy just to annoy a load of people and bash through more calls. But it's sad, isn't it? So yeah, and the other one, which I think most people have got the gist of, I don't know, maybe not, but if you're in the cold call stage, the objective of that first call is to set up the discovery call, not to do the discovery call. And people blend the two. And I think there's research which shows if you separate those two things out, it's a different style of thinking. First one, build a rapport, establish that you can trust me enough to at least have a conversation. You're prepared to invest half an hour of your time, let's say, for me to explain how I might solve the problem that you've admitted that you've got. Don't start solving it there and then. That needs a separate half an hour, 40 minutes, or whatever it is, with more structure to it, maybe a bit of prep.
Yeah, I think that's important, isn't it? Having that structure. So you're actually ticking off everything as you go.
Yeah, I suppose the problem is a salesperson could get so excited that someone's finally picked up the phone to them or responded to an email and they're in a call. They don't want to miss the opportunity. I might not ever get to speak to them again. Let's get it all out now. And that just doesn't come across well. Doesn't come across well at all. So you've got to split it up and be disciplined about it.
And the thing the one stat that stood out to me was that apparently it's okay to curse.
Yes.
And this is American.
That is an American. Yeah, you can swear. Yeah.
Anglicize it. But apparently that's you're supposed to wait for the prospect to
For them to curse first.
Yeah. But it's I thought, well.
So what's this? This stat here says if the prospect doesn't curse, then there's a 5% increased chance of winning the deal. But if the prospect curses first, and then you follow up, there's 20% increase. It's interesting, all these stats that they can get from analysing hundreds of thousands of calls.
But again, apparently it's about coming back to rapport.
Yeah, right.
Because you're dropping that professional persona and you're getting to the real person.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair enough.
Obviously, our language is always impeccable. We wouldn't dream of this.
Especially on the podcast.
Bloody hell. And in everyday life. I speak for myself here.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Parry's potty mouth is legendary.
I'm not so well disciplined. That's not true. You see some of the board meetings I'm in, flipping out. Those listening will know exactly what I mean. I'm the one there policing the language, especially some of the 1970s phrases that come out. Mike, I'm talking about you. Dear me. So there's a certain amount of, I suppose it's leveling with the other person, that rapport building, using the same style.
Be judicious with your language. It's a lesson to learn. And
then there's a few sort of practical things that, I don't know, I took this as a bit obvious really. Listen first, talk later, finish with the next steps. Use the keywords that people like about you and your team and benefit. Yeah, I get all that. There's probably no great surprises there, but it gets thrown up by the data. So why not? Using slides, sharing your screen and using slides. I bet you a lot of people do that. But in a discovery call, shouldn't do that. That's a big reduction. 17% less likely to have a successful outcome if you use slides.
Book a follow-up meeting, yeah.
And you can see that. We've done some work, some ongoing at the moment, but some in the past as well, where we help sales teams work out what are their discovery call questions. And there's also a stat about how many to choose for. That their research says there's a sweet spot in the low teens, 11 to 14.
11 to 14.
Whereas we've done some a bit more than that, some a bit fewer actually. But anyway, the research shows if you take enough samples, that's the better spot. But in going through them all, you wouldn't want that to be on a PowerPoint. If someone saw you effectively reading off a PowerPoint screen, what's your, have you got a budget approved for this? And who's going to make the decision? And all these other discovery call questions, then they're just going to see you as a robot calling off. Whereas if you can embed that into natural conversation, you wouldn't need a PowerPoint to lean on, certainly not when you're sharing. And hopefully you're typing the answer straight into your CRM rather than scribbling a note anyway. So I can see that. But imagine if you did a company presentation thing. It's not the right time to do it.
No.
This is a discovery call. You're finding out about the other person, aren't you?
Yeah. I liked talking about price.
Yes.
That's so you've got to talk about price early.
In the first call.
But when you talk about it in the first call is important.
Yes, towards the back end.
Yeah.
You don't come out with it. You get enough information first. But they say that there's quite an increased rate of success. Now, do they talk about that in the
They've got
discovery call or the cold call?
So say win rates are highest when sellers discuss pricing on the first call. So
First call, yeah.
10% higher.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, that's higher than if they discuss it in the second call, but it's 42% higher than if they don't discuss it at all.
Yeah.
Which I guess sort of makes sense. You've got to discuss pricing at some point. But it's amazing how many buyers will not assume that you're prepared to talk about price and will say, so can you go away and prepare a quote then? Or can you get a proposal to us based on what we've just said? And it's funny, something instinctively I've always done is to say, look, before we get any further, can I give you an idea of the price? Because we can both save each other a lot of time. If I've misunderstood the value you're looking to get from this, and therefore I've not priced it appropriately, or we're not the right solution, let's get that out now. And even if you give a range or a typical, or you can do it this, you can go lower, but you get that instead. That's always worked very well. And I've just instinctively found that. It's never been a bad thing for me, and it's often taken that sting out of the tail, that big elephant in the room question. So when you're into the next call, it's more about, well, how are you going to give me value at that price rather than I don't like that price.
Yeah.
So
no, I think and you're going to get there eventually, aren't you? So you might as well, like I say,
you can't avoid it forever.
You can't avoid it forever. So, and one thing I heard the other day, I think it was McKinsey, is what their approach is to say to their clients, we will not proceed unless we can all agree that the value that we create is greater than the price that we're charging.
Yeah.
And
which is so simple to think
kind of
about,
simple,
but it's actually a very powerful device, isn't it, when you think about that? And if you ingrain everybody in that attitude, we're not here just to charge fees. We've got to make sure we deliver value in excess of our fees.
Well, I think it keeps the sellers honest a little bit. I mean, you have actually got to put the thought into, well, how are we? Let's have an open conversation about how are we adding value here? Because if we're not, then...
And bearing in mind the sort of fees that McKinsey charges, apologies to any McKinsey people listening, you're all worth it, but you're definitely top end of the food chain, aren't you? The big four. And, fair enough. Fill your boots. You're dealing with some big organizations, governments, big multinationals. So if you're charging, 100 million for a big restructuring program, it's got to be worth 200 million, doesn't it? Or more. Yeah. A couple of other ones that I put into the almost too obvious to comment on or do research on, but don't feature dump. It is a common mistake. You see it once again with younger salespeople, less experienced salespeople, where they just want to blurt out all the amazing things that their product or service does. I think most people realize that you've got to talk about benefits before you talk about features, but even before you talk about benefits, you've got to talk about need, right?
Yeah.
And build that rapport. So features are a long way down the list if they appear on the list at all. Be careful. But one that was a bit more surprising was the use of social proof. I thought that was odd because you'd think, we're all taught that social proof helps to give people confidence that they're part of the crowd doing the same thing and they're not being different to everybody else and all that. But it turns out that that's not so powerful after all. It's quite odd.
Who thought?
Yeah, who thought? Certainly in the email bit.
Does it depend on what time? I'm just having to see if I can find it on the data, but
where it comes through.
Where it comes in the process.
Yeah, well, it might well do. And I suppose there is a point at the very end when you're getting to the close stage when it could be valuable, just to say, give reassurance. But if you've got it on your website, you almost don't need to talk about it. I bet you if someone has been talking to you and they go to their board, they'll say, all right, I found this company, I've been in discussions, and on the website it says they're working with, Tesla, BBC and Shell or whatever, then, you don't need...
all of our top clients.
Our clients, yeah. They're working there as well. So you don't need to then ram it down people's throat, do you? No. And maybe that's the reason why this doesn't work, because if you try and make a point of all the people you're working with, then you're almost looking a bit too desperate to make the point.
Well, I think it's about trust as well, isn't it? So at the start, you could, there's plenty of examples of companies who've done, we wrote one email for company X and now we've got company X on the website, or we're hosting a website for someone and we're going to put their brand on the website or whatever it is. If you don't actually know the person, if you don't know the company, why would you've still got to build that trust to actually trust that the social proof is true.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's, I think social proof probably works when you've got individuals maybe giving you testimonials rather than, hey, we've worked with this company, because if you've worked with a massive multinational, you could have worked in an absolutely tiny little bit of...
Well, how many is that true? And how many softwares do you see where they say we've worked with and list all these, Microsoft and Amazon and all that, and you realize that it's someone with a Microsoft address has registered and they've decided to put that on their website. I'm amazed their lawyers don't crawl all over them and get them to take it off. But here's the stats. Apparently, if you mention social proof at all, it knocks your chance of success down by 22%. Right. But if you mention it in the first call, it's down by 47%. So that's half the chance. So it clearly shows that the later on in the process, the more you can get away with it. But if you do it in that first call, according to the Gong research over hundreds of thousands of calls, half the chance of a successful outcome. So listeners, don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
And the other one was don't sell on ROI. It's quite a lot of counterintuitive stuff when you look at the research. And I guess it just goes to show that training courses have been built on, common sense wisdom for a long time without actually backing it up with whether that works or not. But we mentioned that at the beginning. But 27% lower chance of success if you bang on about ROI.
I think it's back to that same point though, isn't it? It's you've still got to build the trust. You've still got to, how do I know that you're saying, okay, you got 10x ROI. Okay. Well, how do I know that? What was the industry? What was the exact, how are you measuring it?
I was just going to say, how are you measuring it? Whenever we've heard that, if someone says we get 10x, okay, let's boil that down. Have you got 10 times more sales for me than I've invested in getting them? And have you taken into account my margin on that? Have you taken into account lifetime value? Have you taken into account other contributory factors to winning that work? Your marketing efforts may well have contributed to me winning it, but that's not the only thing I did. I've been building a reputation for 10 years and hosting award dinners and doing, other outreach stuff.
And also, what's the scale of it? So is it, we're talking millions, or are we saying, well, we got 10x, but because we spent £100 on some Facebook ads and we got £1,000 of sales out of it?
Yeah. As opposed to £100,000
like
on
that's probably not going to move anyone's needle to, it's going to change your life, is it? So yeah, I think that's where I can see, you could be cynical. I think if somebody came to us and said, oh, we've got this ROI, immediately you might jump. But when you're presenting it, you're like, well, oh no, honest, we did do this.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's that. I hear someone talking about some ex-CIA operative talking about someone asked him, what's your top tip that people can learn? Yeah. And he goes, learn the difference between perception and perspective.
Ah, okay. That's interesting.
And he goes, if you can see things from other people's perspectives, you can really leverage that in lots of different ways. Yeah. But your perception is really going to cloud how you act, how you talk, how you do these other things. That's quite interesting. I was hoping for something a bit more, if someone's tailing you, take a left, take a left, take a right.
Does that happen to you often then?
Well, I don't.
Do you get tailed?
Well, I don't think I do.
Now you're going to get paranoid thinking about it. But that, just as a sidetrack, that's an interesting point about debating generally. If you have a difference of agreement with someone else and you're in a heated debate about it, you've got to decide what you're in that debate for now. Are you trying to change their mind, or are you just trying to make yourself feel better for having your view? Because each of them requires a different approach. If you're trying to change someone's mind, stop talking and listen. Yeah. And really understand why for them that makes sense to have that view. Remember, we've used the beach ball paradigm before, that everyone's looking at a beach ball because it's got different coloured stripes all the way around it. You will swear blind that beach ball has got red and green stripes on it, and someone else will swear blind that it's blue and yellow ones. And you're both right.
No, I'm colourblind, so.
Well, there goes that metaphor for smoke.
But no, so it's interesting. I think with all of this, isn't it, that perception perspective paradigm is quite an interesting thing to think about. We all think that why wouldn't somebody want to buy this? Well, that relates to one of the other points they make, is that if you get hit with an objection, and this isn't so much a qualification question now, it's just during the process later on maybe, but if you get hit with an objection from the other side, the first thing you should do is pause. And apparently that has quite a marked effect when they've analysed phone calls. If there's a pause afterwards, then it, breaks the process maybe. Perhaps it gives the impression that you're thinking about it and you're considering the other person's response properly, rather than coming back with some sort of canned, but didn't you realise, whatever it may be. And then the next thing to do after the pause is ask a question. Don't try to address the objection with some sort of reasoning or excuse or explanation. That's interesting. Where have you found that before? Has that burnt you before? Have you heard someone else doing that? Or in what way does that affect you badly then? And how bad can that get? Oh, I see your point. Well, you hear that in a lot of public speaking, don't you? That power of the pause. Slow it down. But no, it is, and you see it when you see people public speaking, and they're always getting faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And it's like, slow it down, cadence and pace, and don't be afraid of the silence. Yeah. So unless you're on a podcast,
Yeah. And even 5 seconds sounds like an eternity.
Sounds like an eternity.
I was on a call the other day with somebody who I was talking to apropos something else and asking them, because I knew they'd used HubSpot before and had moved away from it. And clearly that's interesting for us because we know, no product is suitable for everybody, right? So I think any good salesperson needs to know where it doesn't work as well. So you spot that early on and fail fast, move on, or find a different solution. And he said, if you're starting to look at very high numbers of emails going out, then the email deliverability doesn't quite match up to other solutions. And I thought that was interesting. But I don't have a client where we're sending out 100,000 emails a month. But I guess if you were, and if they're not all qualified and double opted in, then you may well end up with some problems with that. I didn't realize that, say, HubSpot had more of a problem with that than anybody else did. Maybe they all do. But that was their experience of it. So I think it's worth knowing. It's almost like that analogy of the battle cards, the top trumps. Know where you can beat the competition and where you can't, and accept that you're not a right fit for everybody.
Yeah.
And be humble about that.
Yeah.
Just being honest, isn't it? Okay. I think they're the main ones. Oh, email velocity. That was probably the last one I picked up on. And that's something we're building into some HubSpot metrics now, isn't it? There's quite a good correlation between the number of emails per week toing and froing between a buyer and a seller, and whether that deal is going to close successfully or not.
And they made the point that that's not sales emails.
No.
I think in the point they made on that, it's not sales articles, it's sales emails. It's actual conversational, transactional.
Yeah, solution design. Maybe negotiating the structure of the package and all that. It's just the nitty gritty stuff. And that one does sort of make more sense, but people I don't think measure it very much. They probably have an instinct for it. Yeah, there's a lot of traffic going backwards and forwards.
Well, I think a bit like we were talking about with our AI machine learning tool, because it does sound obvious, doesn't it? If you're going to win a deal, or it's getting to that stage, there's going to be more backwards and forwards on the email. That's probably most people would get that. But if you could plot that to show this is for this particular product or the service, this is the normal curve that we would see in terms of email velocity, and then
yes, it won't be constant, will it? It'll be a curve. Yeah.
So are we on it, off it, above it, below it? That sort of thing can then be used for forecasting potentially, or just getting that insight of well, this looks like it's dipping below the line, so do we need to up the cadence of email?
And they make a point, which I can see some salespeople thinking, I'll game this then, I'll artificially increase the rate of emails. That's not the point. It's if they're naturally happening, that's an indicator that the deal is likely to proceed. You can't make the deal more likely to proceed by just sending more emails. So it's a correlation one, not a causation one. And the stats they've got is the average email cadence rate for successful deals is 8 to 9 a week. And for the ones that lose, it's more like 1 to 2. So it's quite a stark difference between the two. So I wonder how many people's CRM systems or sales intelligence platforms, as Gong would call it, report on that. So I'm really interested now to do some analysis.
Well, it's the sort of thing,
build that into reporting.
Into HubSpot and just see what we can
it's not the number of emails spent, and there's no point just having a graph of this week. What's the average looking like? What's the curve looking like?
Whether you could even look at the number of characters. What you wouldn't want to count is something like thanks or on it.
Yeah, maybe not. Although I don't know if they filtered out.
Maybe that's indicative. I don't know.
In their research, yeah.
But yeah, all good stuff to sort of look at and experiment with and play with and get insights from to drive some action, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So we're certainly working on that, and we'll be building some of these stats into how we structure it. So thanks Gong for that, and we've given them a name check, so they've got their money's worth out of it as well. And we'll be building it into what we do with our clients on HubSpot, more on the sales support and CRM side, but it relates as much to where marketing are feeding it in. So it's all part of the big solution, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But it's interesting stuff, and it seems to really be wanted by the clients we're working with.
Well, more and more I'm seeing that getting that alignment between sales and marketing is absolutely critical, because if they're not talking to each other.
Well, you had that example the other day.
And you end up going down a rabbit hole like a dog with a bone.
Well, yes, getting the wrong end of the bone.
Getting the wrong end of the bone. Yeah. And then you speak to sales and you get different insights. And you think, well, actually, if we can just join this up a little bit more.
It's and I saw this in another call I was in earlier in the week, where marketing think they know better than sales, and they say this is what they need as leads, or this is what they want, the type of, and that's not at all what they think they want. Yeah. And you just got to get everybody in a room and agree. Whether one's right or wrong doesn't matter. Just all be working in the same direction. Yeah. As you're paddling around in circles. Okay, good summary there. Thanks for that, Rich.
Very good.
That's good. And thanks for Verity for coming up with the research, the pointers to it, because it added to what we were going to do anyway and took us in a slightly different direction. So that's been very useful. So thank you very much for listening to this week's SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. Wellmeadow is the data-driven growth agency that works on HubSpot and helps all of our clients to grow. We have always asked you in every one of these podcasts to subscribe to our output on whatever podcast platform you get it from, mostly Spotify and Apple, looking at our stats, and tick the little bell so you get reminded when a new episode drops. But as I always say, more than anything else, just tell your friends about it. Tell them that we're producing this output, and if you think you'd like to come on the show as a guest, then give us a bell and I'm sure we can get you on. In the meantime, good luck with your business.